Excellent. So without any further ado, our attendee count is continuing to climb, John, but I'll go ahead and kind of introduce you formally, and then I will hand things over to you to get going here this evening. So a note on Dr. John Skillen. John holds a BA in English from Gordon College and a PhD in literature from Duke University. And John returned to Gordon as a medieval and Renaissance literature specialist before founding the college's arts-oriented Studio for Art, Faith, and History, a program of seminars and retreats based in Orvieto, Italy, which we'll be hearing a little bit more about tonight. And that includes summer programs, which have been led in collaboration with Classical Academic Press for students and teachers from the classical Christian schooling community. Making School Beautiful works in tandem with John's book, Putting Art Back in Its Place, written in 2016, in which he explores the new timeliness of how, in pre-modernity, the work of art was put to work in the life of communities of Christian faith. John's present role as a senior advisor of classical initiatives has extended his engagement with the classical schooling movement. And John, that was a little bit of a formal bio, and perhaps you could lead us a little more informally into our topic tonight. You are the man that everyone is here to listen to, and we're excited and thankful to hear from you. So you can go ahead and take it from here.
Thank you, Joe. I would have been satisfied if there'd been a dozen people signing up, and there's a lot more than that. So I'm grateful for your presence. But let's dive in. Although you may not come away with a lot of practical advice, read the book for that. I hope in 30 or 40 minutes of my talking that you'll be better equipped to ask the right questions and to have sharper eyes when you look at your place of schooling. Here's two important context-setting questions, not really developed here, but I urge you to keep in mind. First, what are the features of contemporary culture and society and its built environment that lie behind what you see as the acute timeliness of classical Christian schooling? Does that make sense? What do you see as the features of contemporary culture that just make you committed to classical Christian schooling? Could be erosion of language, shortened attention span, erasure of history, loss of a sense of place, these sorts of things. I think that any purposeful discussion about the design of your school or your homeschool should start with that question. Second, how do we perceive and assess the degree to which particular places are or are not enhancing the activities intended to be housed in the place? In other words, how do you determine whether a place isn't working the way it is now in its design and so forth? And when is it working? So how do you got that? How do we perceive the degree to which particular places are or are not enhancing the activities to be housed there? Well, here's an example. And I think this is where I'll turn to my PowerPoint, Joe. I guess I can do that through share screen. An example, what if we care about neighborliness? Well, think of the suburban subdivision, keyed to an automobile-based society, garage front and center, family enters the house through the garage, the front door is an empty symbol, the front yard is empty of life, the kids play in the parents' grill in the fenced-in backyard. Now that's a caricature, I know, but you know what I refer to. Well, the small Italian town of Orvieto, and I see that a couple of you know all about Orvieto, and here, let me call up a PowerPoint that I'll keep. Okay, and let's see, you can see Joe and me on the side there. Okay, so there's my cover. Here you go. Let me go. The small Italian town of Orvieto is a sort of second home for the Skillen family, drapes over a mesa. Its built environment was in place by 1400 with Etruscan and Roman elements still visible, narrow streets, pedestrian only in much of the town. When walking the streets, neighbors are talking across the street from second floor windows. People meet on the streets and chat, with cafes just about every 100 meters. There's always a nearby place to continue over a coffee together. Benches along the way, often the daily posts of the elderly. Parents walk their kids to and from the elementary school and chat with each other. One day, I forgot to pick up our young daughter, Isabel, after school. So she, unafraid in Orvieto, started walking back to our apartment alone. I got a phone call from the elderly proprietors of one of the little foodstuff shops saying that they were keeping Isabel until I got there, also with a sense that I was being a neglectful father. Well, not a fair comparison. The fabric of Orvieto fosters neighborliness. The suburban development hinders it. Does that make sense? Well, in making school beautiful, I distinguish 3 dimensions of the fittingness in the design of every purposeful place, with reference to the classical Renaissance architect Leon Battista Alberti. Okay, a nice quotation from Alberti's Art of Building, written about 1450. The parts of a building ought to be so composed, in fact, there you are, ought to be so composed that their overall harmony contributes to the honor and grace of the whole work. And that effort is not expended in adorning one part at the expense of all the rest, but that harmony is such that the building appears a single, integral, and well-composed body, rather than a collection of extraneous and unrelated parts. Okay, the 3 aspects of harmony or decorum of a well-designed building, including a school. So here's the 3 topics. These are really the organizational topics of the book itself. 1, are the elements that make up your school, the library, chapel, classrooms, lunchroom, gymnasium, the entry area, and so forth, in harmony with each other and with the whole? So the whole school, does it all, fit together well? Secondly, is each and every element of a particular room maximally enhancing the purpose and actions enacted in that place? And third, how does your school's campus indicate its place in the larger surrounding setting, whether rural, suburban, or urban? Asked differently, is the profile of the school as seen from the outside? What do people see when they look at your school? Does the profile of the school express what the school intends to be its mission and its relationship to the society around it? Now, that's in fact the framework of my brief talk this evening. I will give not answers, but case studies for those 3 questions, okay? Are the elements that make up, this is the first one again, are the elements that make up your school, in fact, maybe I should say, does that make sense? Imagine a school building. The whole building is there, but then each classroom is being decorated or furnished in some way, but the school lives in a larger setting, right? So the school inside each part and then looking out. It's that simple. Okay. So are the elements that make up your school, all those different rooms and aspects, even the athletic field, in harmony with each other and with the whole? Well, an example, Monastery Design, and now in my book on page 107, if you already have it, some of you, that's where I'm talking, okay? The cloister in a monastery serves as the unifying hub of all the key rooms in the monastery. That is, they're all reached from this cloister. The entry for lay people, the hostelry or guest house, the chapel or church, the chapter house, which is the meeting room of all the monks or nuns, the dining hall, okay, the monastery church typically flanks the cloister so that the cloistered community can enter the choir directly from the cloister, and then sitting across from each other in the choir okay, so that whose furniture arranges to across each other to assist the chanting of the Psalms. And actually, I said a couple of things there. The choir, which has two, opposing banks of pews, say, is just right for doing antiphonal singing back and forth. Okay, whereas the lay visitors and guests can enter the church through the main door from outside, with the entrance into the guest house close by. Okay, well, what is the equivalent or the lack thereof in schools that you know? Does the arrangement say the experienced relation between the chapel and the library, perhaps the gymnasium as the first thing through the front door? Okay, does the arrangement of rooms signal well the priorities outlined in the mission statement? So I hope that's simple. I give you a case study. Okay, I'll get back to just a cloister. Everything unfolds in a coherent pattern in a monastery. And I wonder if we can say that in the equivalent of each of our schools. Okay, here's an example. Does the din of the cafeteria, happy as it may be, with 2 or 3 25-minute luncheon periods, if that's the case to any of your schools, does that din of the cafeteria interrupt the skole atmosphere of unhurried learning reflected in the other parts of the school? Now, I don't know if that's relevant for any of you, but did you see it? What if you have a place that fractures or just doesn't jive with the intended atmosphere that might be in place for the rest of the school? Okay, so that's an example, a good example of a monastery of that first question. 2, is each and every element of a particular room or setting maximally enhancing the purpose and actions enacted in that place? Okay, a couple of examples. And this first one is in fact, that would be on pages 42 and 43 in the book, but I'm not reading from the book. I just let you know where I am there. All those Last Suppers frescoed on the end walls of monastic dining halls, there's one, it's in Marco, place the daily occasion of the community's meals in the context of Jesus's final discourse to his disciples over their Last Supper. The new skill of perspectival drawing and painting developed in the Renaissance allowed the trompe-l'oeil effect of making the painted wall appear to be an extension of the actual space. If you know about this table arrangement here, can you see here? That's exactly what was continued around the other 3 walls, so that all the monks or nuns in this monastery were sitting just like the disciples. That's what happens. Okay, another one. Yeah, Pope Julius II's library. Many of our schools have a reproduction of, right there. Many of our schools have a reproduction of Raphael's famous painting, The School of Athens, hung on a classroom wall as a reproduction. I hope that at least some of you have that experience. Okay, all of you, I bet, have seen this painting that you're looking at there. Great for including the classical curriculum, but the so-called School of Athens is just one of the frescoed walls in Pope Julius's library, with scenes reflecting the thematic concerns of the 4 main areas of Julius's collection of manuscripts: philosophy, theology, poetry or literature, and jurisprudence or law. Got that? Philosophy, theology, literature, and law. Well, in the book, I give a little discussion of how the 2 main frescoes on opposite walls surely contrasts the philosophy of the Greeks stuck in the binary of form and matter with the theology of the Trinity and the Incarnation, by which Jesus is truly God and man. Okay, now here, you see that in this slide, these are the two walls that face each other right there. And here's the one often two, and here, I want you to show you, there's always in the summer at least, a sea of people taking pictures. So there they are, and nobody is taking picture of what's behind their back. This is the theology wall, not so famous. Now, I won't try to, I discuss this in the book, but do you see Plato and Aristotle? These folks follow Plato. These folks are Aristotelian. There was a kind of, there's a middle that's empty with two strange figures. Okay, so two. Here, do you see that Father, Son, and Holy Spirit above the Eucharistic wafer? It's a strong single axis. The groups all together pointing up and down as in signals that Christ is the incarnate one. Okay, well, so I want to put it there. In fact, at the bottom of the wall were all the books themselves, the manuscripts. I should say that each of these panels is about 25 or 30 feet wide. It's a big cube of a room. And can you imagine being in the center of that room, you know, going there to look at books surrounded by these frescoes? Okay. In other words, what you've got there is not just the Greek philosophers, but a Christian classical approach to the books for learning. Isn't that neat? Okay, now, how does your third question, I'm on there already. How does your school's campus indicate its place in the larger surrounding setting? Asked differently, is the profile of the school as seen from the outside expressing what the school intends to be its mission and its relation to the relationship to the society around it? Okay. Now here again, you'll tell, I'm not really talking about schools. I'm giving you completely different examples and models that then you could think of, apply to your school. So here goes. Let me go back to Orvieto. So I got this right out of Google Earth. Here it is. Okay, and I want to point out it's 3 piazzas. I wish I could be talking to each one of you there. I don't know what your questions are. Here's the main street, and it takes 15 or 18 minutes. So it's about a mile from one end to the other. Well, right here, we'll see is the big cathedral, okay? And there's a big wide palazzo or piazza, plaza right there. Well, over here is the market piazza, where every Thursday and Saturday is just filled with the umbrellas of people bringing food to sell and the like. And then this piazza is the civic political. That's where the town hall is. Now, I wonder if I have time to say, actually, until the last century, this building here is the big medieval town hall. This was the political civic piazza, and this was the market piazza. But now I just want you to see that the roads convene. You see how they make a cross right there? And these 3 piazzas, they determine the whole town. Okay. Let me have some more. Here, okay, close up. There's this big piazza by the cathedral. There's the other one, and there's the other one. I have some other pictures of this later. Okay, now the church, right? Remember, that's it, because this pattern is through many, many, many European and certainly Italian towns from that age. There's always the church piazza, the religious center of town. And then there's always the political center in town with town hall. And there's always the market time, the market piazza. Now I want to say, add about the market. The marketplace with all the foodstuffs is not just for commerce, but it's really for social interaction. It was the center of just social life. You know, I used to be frustrated in my early years in Orvieto when in line in front of some table of a farmer with lots of beautiful vegetables, the local ladies would not just say, I want this hunk of, this zucchini or this hunk of lettuce. They'd start talking. Always, is this fresh enough? I want the most fresh one that you have. And what's it going to be like inside? And then the tender there, I'm the farmer, would ask, well, what are you going to cook it for? Because he wanted to know the recipe. Then she'd talk about the recipe, and then he'd say, well, I think this would be the better size for that. And before long, except it's long, it could be 10 minutes standing there, these people are talking about the meal and the cooking and all the cuisine. So I want you to see that. Isn't that fun? That doesn't happen in our local harvest market. Okay, here this is what happens in that market piazza. Okay, well, all three, I call them pivot points, create a triangle that draws together, that brings into coherence and reference to the whole, the three dimensions of life as it was understood. Now, I'm hoping you can just get a sense of that from a little overhead map. And that is the whole center of town. Everybody is walking from one to the other, and it gives that coherence to that town, okay? Well, then I want to go back to this, excuse me. Well, here's some pictures. There's the street, you see how narrow they are, from the cathedral to the bell tower, okay? Here's the piazza one day, which I love because I'm a car lover, where the whole local club or the regional club of Ferrari drivers brought their cars. Everybody comes around and talks and takes pictures. That's next to the cathedral. Here, it's a winter night, but this is from the clock tower down to that political piazza. And here, there's not many people because everyone's in having supper right now, but all the downtown in the winter from Advent through Epiphany is lined with lights. Holds the whole thing is like a living room. Now here, okay, this is last Sunday was Corpus Christi Sunday, if any of you are following the church here. And the Orvieto was where Pope Urban IV launched the Corpus Christi holiday. Well, okay, and that's, so anywhere, in fact, that procession, enormous, sometimes our students are invited to be in it, goes from piazza to piazza and then back to the Duomo. Can you imagine civic activities that themselves line and identify the city? This happens we've been here many times. This is the Good Friday Stations of the Cross service. Everyone, this is clearly pre-COVID. Look at that. Most of the town with their own candles is processing from place to place where there's a Station of the Cross. Well, now I'm back here. So you can see, one more thing, then I'll be done with this part. For many centuries, there were a dozen or so monasteries and convents and monasteries in Orvieto, most along the church, along the ridge. Now, actually, you can tell by the courtyards. Here's San Giovanni. Here is San Ludovico, where our program, the semester program, was lodged for 7 years. Here's Buen Gesù. Here's the Sisters of the Misericordia. Okay, then here is San Paolo, another place where Gordon had lodged. You see the courtyard? And then over here is San Domenico, bashed down mainly by the fascist period army base. That's where Thomas Aquinas lived for 6 years. And then let's see, there's one right here of the sisters in that whole green area. And then this one, and then there's one more. It's back to San Giovanni. Now I did that for you. See how I went around the edge? Because all the convents were called l'anella della città, the ring of the city. Okay, why? Because in fact, people thought they had the guardian of prayers of the nuns and monks all around the city. Several monasteries operated, and some still do, schools. So that was also a ring of schools. Isn't that interesting on that town? Well, so there's the question. this was all part 3, that third thing. What place does your school have in the civic fabric around it or in the surrounding community? No place in the civic fabric because it wants to distinguish itself from the civic setting, to really be a radical alternative. Does the campus perimeter, the landscaping of the school, set up a barrier, or like a Benedictine monastery, a deliberate integration of the cloistered community and the care and hospitality to the guest or the stranger? That'd be fun. I'd like to talk about that more. I do in the book. Is that the monasteries in the main monastic movements, the Benedictine for one, yeah, they're a cloistered community, but they're not off. The townspeople are welcome into part of their life. The door is open. The first thing that happens is the guest house, where Benedict says in his rule that every guest should be treated as though he is Christ. So we can, there's that strong sense of serving the people around. Okay. Or I said, is there a deliberate integration of your schools into the community? Here's a spot where I want to refer to our important homeschool and co-op school folks who make more likely the whole town is the place of schooling, as some of you already do, inviting the involvement of local artisans or farmers. Some schools may have a big organic garden apart with it. Other homeschoolers may want to take, as they do here, take their kids out to Cider Hill Farm to learn all about farming, okay? As it's proposed, I wonder if any of you know this book. I'm going to read you one passage, A Pattern Language. It's a big, it's 1,000 pages. And here, they offered this when it was written back in the 80s, I think, this radical view about education. Imagine, they say, people of all walks of life coming forth and after a class in the things they know and love, and offer, a class in the things they love. Professionals and work groups offer apprenticeships in their office and workshops. Old people offer to teach whatever their life work and interest has been. Specialists offer tutoring in their special subjects. Living and learning are, the same. He then imagines where every third or fourth household will have at least one person in it who is offering a class or training of some kind. Now, think about that. What if the whole town became, I'm thinking of you homeschoolers, where you had friends around the block, your children went and talked with the skilled carpenter, or the mechanic, or the woman who is great with needlepoint and made visits like that. Well, you know what? Look, I'm done. I didn't offer any answers to my questions, but my intention here is to offer some prompts to get you thinking about the 3 dimensions of a well-designed school or a home school. And I'll find out, I hope, whether this had any help for you. Prompts, in other words, to think of those 3 things. Is the whole school a coherent single thing? Does each room work as you wish it to be? And then what is your relation to the outside community? A final note, why my focus on Orvieto this evening? And I did that. Well, kind of because it's a model for me and other architects, like a very important Christian architect, Christopher Miller, who always takes his architecture groups to Orvieto. But also because the Classical Academic Press has worked with my Studio for Art, Faith, and History to offer 2-week seminars for teachers. And because Gordon College's classics students regularly come on the semester program for a rich experience of the continuity of history, from Etruscan to a fascist military base. And Gordon College's new graduate master's degree in educational leadership has now launched a special track for classical schools. We have our first fully enrolled cohort this summer. with a lot of people that many of you will know as teachers: Chris Perrin, Keith Nix, Eric Cook, Leslie Moeller, David Diener, Chris Schlecht, Davis Owens. Okay, I bet some of you know those names. Launched with a summer residency in Orvieto. I also can mention, we can post these, I guess, several books that have been helpful to me in bringing out these conditions. I'll name them, and Joe will know if I should do this slowly, more slowly. Eric Jacobson's The Space Between. You know what? There, I'll hold up there's his The Space Between. Murray Ray's Architecture and Theology. John Ing's A Christian Theology of Place. James Howard Kunstler's two books, The Geography of Nowhere and Home from Nowhere. And then let's see, and Beyond Homelessness, Christian Faith in a Culture of Displacement by Stephen Booma Prediger and Brian Walsh. So there are others, but those books have been, here's that book, okay, that last one, that have been, in fact, they, to some degree, inform Making School Beautiful. Okay, I'll pause. Was I too short or too long, Joe? How'd I do?
I think what we'll do, John, is since there were several good books mentioned there, we can send those out in a follow-up email next week, so everyone gets them there, and we'll have those linked and accessible through the email. But then if you just want to list the titles slowly here too, I can type them in the chat. My chat box was not opening as you read those, so I missed the first go around. But if you want to type the title, or if you want to say the titles again, I can type them in.
Well, but Joe, is it easy enough? Can I cut and paste what I just read there and put it into the chat?
Surely can. You surely can. Yep.
Okay. Let's try it.
I think there'll be at least a handful of happy attendees to get those titles listed.
Is it working there? There. Yeah, it's up, right? To panelists, is that?
You have to select panelists and attendees.
Right, of course.
And it should.
Is it up there? Did I need to tell me if I had to do anything more?
I don't see it on my end yet.
There.
There it is. There it is. Perfect, John. Thank you. That's great. And like I said, we'll follow up and
okay,
and put that in. And then we had one question. We can, if you remember, we had a question for the quote in the PowerPoint as well, the quote that you shared.
Yeah, I'm sorry, from Alberti's. Let me, you know what, excuse me, I can do the same thing. Here we are. Page, okay, ready? That's a good quote. Thank you, says Zipra. Okay.
Thanks. Thank you, John.
I maybe talked so fast that I could have said more, Joe, but should I?
Can we quickly review, and I know there's a few attendees who will want to write this down. Take note of this. Can we review your 3 questions?
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm happy to, and I think here they are. So just, I guess I could put, these are clearly in the book, okay, but here they are. And I do want these to make sense, and maybe are the elements that make up your school in harmony with each other and with the whole. God, think through, all the, I mean, do you have an entryway? Is there a separate, do you have a chapel? And I know schools, for all kinds of reasons, have, a multi-purpose hall that can be for, convocations or the chapel service that occurs. So think about that. So anyway, the chapel, the dining hall for lunch, if you had that, the gymnasium, all of the classrooms. Is the art studio a different kind of classroom? So that's what I'm talking. And when I say harmony, I gave you that one example. What if the ethos, the atmosphere of those rooms is different, just doesn't jive well. But it could be, I think I've seen some schools, and boy, this is not critical in the least. You know what, here's an important, let me put in a parenthesis, Joe, that I wanted to say, is that look, schools are dealing, some starting from scratch, some just getting by on a shoestring, all kinds of conditions. That quote is pretty idealistic from Leon Battista Alberti. But what I would rather say is you do the best you can with what you've got, okay? So that are now things that I discuss in detail in the book. What if you have to have a multi-purpose room that is the lunch hall, it's the chapel, it's when you have group meetings, maybe with guests coming. There are things that can help identify or transform that space into what it should be. Maybe tapestries that are around, things like that. But anyway, I'm saying that each element of those needs to work with what happens in it. And I'm pretty sure that isn't always the case. Anyway, the second is the task, is each and every element of a particular room maximally enhancing what goes on in that room. Here's a very silly thing. What if typically the students' chairs are all in rows, and maybe they're bolted down for all I know, and then the teacher stands or sits up front. But then the teacher wants to have discussion as a whole. Well, actually, rows are not a very good, arrangement for a conversation among everybody. Does that make sense? That's what you need, a conference table or desks that can be very quickly put together and made into a nice big rectangle. So I'm saying that discussion needs one kind of furniture and lecturing needs another kind. Let's see, in my book, I give examples even in my life when we had faculty meetings in the bolted down little hall, a little room. And we had to turn around to see each other. The only person seeing everybody was the provost at the front. And often we'd be discussing, but it really was awkward. So those are just simple things of when the inside of a room is just not really conducive maximally to what you're trying to do. That's why, it's funny, I'm glad to have schools with reproductions of the School of Athens, but that distorts what the School of Athens is. It was a whole wall. Maybe we need to have, larger murals for each. In fact, I know a fellow who went to Orvieto and came back inspired, and he's made the whole entry into the library as the wardrobe that you walk through, just like the Narnia kids. Isn't that neat? So you walk through the wardrobe to get into the library that opens up worlds upon worlds. Well, that's creative. That's a great example. Okay, anyway, the third is, what do you see when you look outside, the school? But more importantly, what are people picking up when they look at your building or your campus, if you have a whole campus? And that's worth a lot of discussion. I give a lot of discussion. I'll say, some some schools that want to be very hospitable to the local neighborhood actually look more like, blocked out prisons. I mean, they're really strong without any welcoming perforation. Schools that, in fact, are utterly in tune with the town, maybe they don't just have some flower beds around the campus because there's real porousness with the neighborhood around. Or maybe the school wants to have a sense of coming into an enclosure, but it's not a barricade. So then maybe you have kinds of hedges rather than walls, things like that. So I just, again, all of this is for each school or, to be thinking about. How can we best design our campus so that it exudes what we want to exude when people are, for the people who are being served by it.
John,
I know
we've had
yep.
a couple great questions come in. I want to make sure we hit those. Thank you for highlighting. And those three questions that John posed are rhetorical. Those are ongoing questions that we will be answering, whether in a school or homeschool setting. And those three questions are ones that I've included in the chat box here, and then we'll include those in the follow-up email as well. And with those as three tenets to John's point. But John, I did want to hit on a few questions, starting with one from Louise. Her point being that a lot of the quote unquote campuses for attendees in this webinar, readers of your book, are suburban homes. So what are some non-architectural points for those suburban homeowners to consider? Does your research into education and space help think about aesthetics in homeschooling or in co-ops in a particular way?
Yeah, it does. In fact, and that's why I really do sincerely try to keep homeschoolers and even family co-ops, that work together. I'm repeating, and that's it, just to say, I think that one way of having a homeschool that is also in touch with the community is to draw on people in the community to be help doing the teaching. Chris Hald, that name from he's has a brand new classical academic press called Uncommon Arts. And, all kinds of things are naturally able to open up and connect with the neighborhood. And I think a lot of those can be done by a homeschool. Now, what I would say, that's where this, man, I did say, and some of these books will really go hard on the enclosure of the suburban, especially cul-de-sac design, where it isolates everybody. But that seems to be what the point was largely back in the 60s, when earlier suburban developments were developed. But what I want to say is plenty of people are in a suburban home and yet not wanting to be unneighborly. Can I put it that way? Then that requires some creativity. I hope I'm responding to that question. What can you do? Well, transform the front yard in a way that it doesn't naturally do. It's the place where your garden is, that with a big sign that says, help yourself to the tomatoes. Is there things that instead of barricading the family in the backyard, to be having that where other kids can be gathered? So in other words, it's often in suburbia, you have to get to anywhere by a car. And if you have to, you have to. But then there's, I'm one, along with a lot of the books I've mentioned, that think that, well, is more walking and is there anything that we can do to actually give bodily presence to ourselves and to our schools, to our home schools? So I don't know that gets very far, but I do want to be thinking about other forms of classical Christian schooling that are not in a bricks and mortar school. And I want to get across that, man, I think that's an important sector. It's not new. It's really old fashioned, actually, in that way. So, well, I blabbed away there. I'm not sure that helped.
I,
You
I I
other
think it was appropriate, and it is a bit of a multifaceted answer. And but I think you did supply a good answer, John. Another question, and I want to keep moving because we have a few more really good ones. These two are a little similar, so I'm going to lump them into one question. But we had one attendee ask, for many of us, our co-ops meet in church buildings. We have no authority to make changes to the rooms that we are using. What's your advice for creating harmony in borrowed settings? And the similar question was, there's those of us who have little control over the beauty in our community. How do you help students make sense out of what otherwise may be chaos and discord and find beauty there? So two different questions, but both pertaining to the idea of just a lack of control. So do you have a response to that, John?
Yeah, well, I'll speak for a bit, but those. Apparently, I want to repeat. I don't have an idealistic view of all this. You do the best you can with what you've got. Uh, yeah, I know many schools are in other places, maybe a church hall or basement and you can't just go in and redo it. Well, can one? But I'm sure all of you've thought about these things. Yeah, what are the limits? What would be permissible? I might say that even having, this is where the old tapestries come in. Think of your place as a tabernacle more than a temple. And instead of doing, the modern, the foldable dividers, can you have a series of, curtains that, in fact, your students have painted, or things that have reproductions big of artworks that matter for what you're teaching there. So in other words, can you make really a portable banner? I mean, a place that is around particular places. So I guess what I'm saying is be creative. And that's maybe not much of a help, but it's the creativity in saying, what can I do within the means we have for making the circumstances of the teaching match and support what it is that we are teaching. That's all I'm saying. Now, the related one, what if, I see it just a really important mission for not all classical Christian schools, but a lot of them is how to create beauty and a place that feels like a refuge, a secure place that is different than maybe what I come from in my neighborhood. That can be important. You do your best. I'm thinking of a school in Pennsylvania that I know well. I probably shouldn't be naming all of these because that would be unfair, but I could, Joe. A school that, in fact, made the school started the school in an old warehouse, and it's been fit in. It still has the beams. It has that sense of an old factory warehouse sort of place. Now they're booming. They've added a new. But what I remember when one of my visits there was hearing about a grandfather. That the area of this town is multiracial, multi-ethnic, and an older, very old, the grandfather, a Black man, would walk his boy to school, where no one was stopped from being at school, depending on financial capacity or something. And he says, I was told that early on he wept one day because as a little boy, he would go around town collecting scrap metal and bring it in his big wagon to this place where they would buy it from him. And that's what that school meant. But it was a place, but anyway, I'm saying the circumstances around the school, and this could be the case for a homeschool or a co-op place, is not like the school. It's got visual business. It's ugly maybe in this part of town. But what I would say, I'm again giving my sensibility about this. Instead of kind of barricading or try to create this self-contained beautiful place, the creative edge is how to both introduce beauty in the neighborhood around. Maybe the theater production should be done in a vacant lot that then can be cleared away and given a whole new identity. Or maybe, maybe you can ask for the school's garden to be put in a place because there's a weedy bed somewhere. So it's really letting the school seep out in a way that presents things that are just deeply moving and satisfying to the soul and the imagination. Well, there again, what I'd like to be doing is to answer these questions at each school that's asking them, or each homeschool family. I'd love to see where you are and what you're doing and brainstorming with you.
Dr. Skillen, school beautifying consulting services.
Well,
maybe that's the next step.
If I'm good enough at doing that, I'd be happy to do that, but I ain't there yet.
John, we do have a very specific question from a school.
Looking
a unique circumstance. So I'll ask you this one. This comes from an anonymous attendee. So our school is a K through 12 school, but we have two campuses a mile and a quarter apart. One is a former shopping center, and the other is a Monticello colonial style building. What recommendations do you have that foster an approach to order, coherence, and relation to its place in the community? Our main issue is that our culture is supposed to be one school, not two separate schools.
Yeah. Yeah, Joe, I'm always so, I'm sidetracking for just to say, the variety of schools and co-ops and families around the country that are following classical Christian schooling in motives is remarkable to me. A school, so one of those campuses in an old shopping center. Well, it's interesting. What for me is the stark contrast between the original meaning of a shopping center as just sheer commerce. All of that was allowed during the 60s and 70s with urban zoning rules that tried to get, dwellings in one place, commercial things in another area, and segregated things. Now, so what I'm getting to is, well, I wonder if is the macadam around the parking lot, gone, or can it be gotten rid of, or can you have raised bed gardens in the parking lot? But I think that opposition of a school with a bunch of stores is really kind of creatively exciting to me. I wonder, is it a strip mall or is it a little old interior mall? Well, that would be an opportunity to make a school, maybe you're already doing this. In other words, using stores for the variety of places that make up a school. In other words, you have to counter what the meaning is of a shopping center. And yet, if you did that, and if actually, wow, what if the townsfolk were coming to what the parents remember as just the place where we hung around Friday evening, smoking in the parking lot or something, or it's where I got greedy for as many shoes I could buy or something. What was the meaning of the shopping center for the parents of the students? And then even work with them. How can we completely change the ethos of this space while remembering what it once was? And actually, there's something profoundly, how do I say, salvific, Christian about that. I mean, that's what God does with us, complete transforming of from one thing to another. But in another sense, it's like this is what this plot of land was wanting to be, not a shopping center, but a school where parents come for theater productions, where some of the walls outside could be murals. Imagine a mural of the School of Athens on the outside, brick wall at the end of the shopping center. Now, of course, I'm winging it because I don't know what kind of a shopping center you're dealing with, but in that way, that's a response.
And any thoughts on, I mean, given the nature of the second type of building, it's a colonial style building is what it was described as, and just that idea of coherence between two separate places, or even the coherence between, say, in a homeschooling setting, creating coherence between two separate rooms in a house.
That is and I was expecting whether or not a question, for homeschoolers. Well, you'll know more than I have, although in fact, during COVID, I've been helping a couple of families with some homeschooling. I'm of the opinion that it's better to have a place without distractions that becomes conducive to the attitude of reading, great novels. And that's where that happens. Rather than having everybody sit around doing all the things at the kitchen counter with cell phones nearby and all of that. Although I don't want to be stark about that, because there's something, what a kitchen can do is to make the artisan feel of learning. We're studying medieval period. Let's make a medieval soup on the stove. What if the whole kitchen becomes the kitchen of the different periods of history? So I'm saying that would be a different kind of thing. But I would say, as I'm sure all or most of you have figured out, one of the chief distractions of young people is distractions. The poor attention span because you hear a click on this phone. So I suspect, I would certainly urge it if you haven't, just to eliminate cell phones from the school sector. It just doesn't happen. So that, in other words, to create places that, gee whiz, maybe there should be the comfy room with a cozy sofa or chair that your children can curl up in to read Jane Austen in, or to read things. For that matter, in a homeschool, it's probably easier there than is to read aloud together. So that what if after supper, sitting around, as maybe you do, if the family has dinner together, just every night reads for half an hour all together, passing it around a single novel. And we've done that. We have a reading club where we don't discuss books, we just read them aloud. And it's just so enriching. Okay, there's a start of something. I really don't know if that helps.
No, I certainly think it does. Thank you for your answer, John.
I'll move on with these myself.
I'll move on to another question from Gene. This one is a little more grandiose and perhaps will stretch your imagination a little bit, but a great question. Gene asks, we are preparing to build a building. What would your dream school look like?
Well, yeah, that's it. But boy, I love that question. That's really, I don't know whether I get more excited about building a school, but I probably get more excited about rehabbing a non-school. I think that just is fun. But okay, you're building a school. Well, the first thing, is do I have a dream school? Well, I think every school needs, I shouldn't say need. What I believe is deeply helpful for this community and the school is to build and furnish a school that fits in, especially with the historic and geographical topographical nature of, of where it is. So that means, a lot of people think, and I'm not knocking this, think of neoclassical architecture as the proper architecture for all classical schools. I actually don't think that. I think it should be indigenous. We need Adobe, schools in the Southwest. You should be working with what is in the area. I would even, again, so here's an ideal of mine. Here's my dream school. That nothing of the furnishings, so I'm being idealistic here, nothing of the furnishings came from the big suppliers, mainly built of metals and plastics and things like that. Where picking your furniture is just going through a catalog or a showroom and picking desk types. I would like to see the school maximally hiring or using the work of local artisans. Find the furniture makers of the area. And if that's even, at least think about that idea, even if it's not really feasible, is have local artisans supply the furnishings so that you become, that's just a strong way of saying we're with you. We honor what you're doing. Your trade is important to us. We want your design, your craftsmanship to be exhibited in our school. So it's that approach, I think, would be my dream school. And then the other would be a dream school is actually a school, and I do address this, that as fully as possible exhibits a response to the great crises of our time. Ecological destruction, call it climate change. I mean, are there things that even going solar, that is doing things that show we are sensitive to the towns and the country that these young kids will be adults in? Give them models for facing the crises that they're likely to make. So a school that is responsive to the future, who shares and prizes the past, and that works with the people right there, then and now in the present. That is how I would say, that's my school. And I think that school would look different in Florida than it will be in Washington State or Montana or Texas or Pennsylvania. Follow if you're building a school, the indigenous or the architectural styles that have marked that town and that region. But what if, I'd love to have I grew up in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. I loved the stone barns and the big wood barns. And man, I'd like to have a school that just fit into the beautiful barns of Amish country that I just loved when we drove to my grandparents' house. So it's doing that, the local thing. That's what I would be suggesting. Don't just go to the conventional structures and furnishings. Don't go like every other school. Don't ask the public school, where do you get all your stuff? Find out, work personally, and give it, even if it costs more, it'll probably be better made. It'll still last because people will be committed to what you do because you've drawn on their skills and their loves to build that school.
Thank you, John. I think that's a great question to wrap up our night, and a great response to from Dr. Skillen. Any final thoughts from you as we conclude our evening together?
Well, probably not. I do believe the value, because it's age old, of making sure we're looking through those three different lenses. the room itself, the school as a whole, and the surrounding community. So I'm just repeating that for a final time. I do think that it's really important for us as schools and families schools, to be conversant with and responsive to the concerns of the whole globe and of your local region. And if the school simply gets, in a sense, is a victim as well as the others of things that have not been faced well, say in climate or if the school can be at a leader, the one that's already gone, the pioneer, the school that is looking ahead, gathering, honoring together the folks around, the folks that are sending their children to you. That's really important. I don't see classical education as nostalgically old-fashioned at all. And I know that that is not the case for most schools. I'd like to see it as it is, an avant-garde movement that is retrograde. Let's not ditch the great books, the great ideas that have been important for our own heritage.